When a company town loses its company, the decay arrives quietly, one mortgage payment, one empty storefront at a time. In Beaverton, Oregon, that process is already underway. Nike, the largest employer in Washington County, has reduced its workforce at its headquarters campus for 4 consecutive years, 740 jobs in the first round alone. The running paths still wind past the lake. The buildings are still named after athletes, but the number of people working inside them is smaller every year. In 1990, Nike completed the first phase of its permanent headquarters on 400 acres of unincorporated land southwest of Portland, Oregon. The buildings were named after athletes. There was a Michael Jordan building, a Pete Sampras building, buildings for Mia Hamm and Joan Benoit Samuelson, who had won the first women's Olympic marathon in 1984 while wearing Nikes. Running paths wound past a lake, past soccer fields, past a 44,000 square foot fitness center. Nike did not call what it had built a corporate headquarters. It called it a world. That word was chosen deliberately. A headquarters is a place people go to work. A world sustains itself, and for several decades, what Nike built on those 400 acres did exactly that, sustaining itself and the community that grew up around it in ways that made the description feel accurate rather than promotional. Nike was founded in 1964 in Eugene, Oregon by Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman. Bowerman coached track at the University of Oregon and had spent years experimenting with running shoe design in a workshop behind his house. He once poured urethane into a waffle iron to test what the sole pattern would do for grip. Knight had been one of his runners, a middle-distance man who ran a mile in 4 minutes and 13 seconds. They started importing Japanese running shoes and selling them from the trunk of Knight's car at track meets along the Pacific coast, calling themselves Blue Ribbon Sports, and working out of a single rented office in Portland. In 1971, they renamed the company after the Greek goddess of victory and registered the swoosh logo that a Portland State University graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson had drawn for $35. They went public in 1980. Through the decade that followed, Nike signed Michael Jordan, launched the AIR Jordan line, introduced Just Do It, and became the largest sporting goods company in the world. Annual revenue by 1990 was roughly $3 billion, and the campus at Beaverton wasn't a speculative bet on future growth. It was where the company had decided to be. The land it chose sat in an unusual legal position relative to the city that surrounded it. Technically, the campus was in unincorporated Washington County, not inside Beaverton, even though Beaverton streets ran around it on every side. For most of the 1990s, that distinction was administrative and largely ignored. Then, as Nike grew and regional transit-oriented development planning began applying to land near MAX light rail stations, those lines operated by TriMet, the Portland Metro Transit Authority, Beaverton started trying to bring the campus within its city limits. The city wanted roads through the property and housing density near the transit stop. Nike didn't want either. The dispute ran for years. In 2005, Nike told Oregon's governor it was prepared to move 5,000 jobs out of the state if the annexation effort continued. The Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 887 that same year, sponsored in part by Senator Charlie Ringo. Under that bill, Beaverton is specifically prohibited from forcibly annexing Nike's land until 2040. The law covers an exact parcel. It was written to protect one private company from one city's government, though Nike was not alone. Tektronix and Columbia Sportswear were among the other Oregon employers whose properties were shielded by the same legislation, a detail that tells you something about the relationship between large employers and the governments that depend on them. As far as anyone has been able to establish, nothing like it exists anywhere else in the country. Beaverton encircles a campus it can't legally govern, and that will remain true for another 14 years. That arrangement was the price Oregon paid to keep Nike, and for about 20 years, it seemed worth it. In 2005, Nike commissioned an economic impact study from a Portland consulting firm called Eco Northwest. The study found that Nike's Oregon operations accounted for about 16,500 jobs, direct and indirect, and contributed nearly $2 billion annually to the state economy. Nike was Oregon's only Fortune 500 company. The headquarters employed roughly 11,400 people, according to its most recent securities filing. None of them were factory workers, since Nike had moved all manufacturing offshore by the 1980s, shifting progressively through Japan and South Korea before settling in Southeast Asia. The people on the campus were designers, engineers, marketing executives, technology developers, supply chain managers, and the many layers of strategy and administration that any 60-year-old organization accumulates. Most of them earned salaries well above Oregon's median. They bought houses in Washington County. Their children attended local schools. The restaurant corridor near the campus had developed to serve their lunch hours, and commercial real estate nearby filled with tenants who needed that population to stay stable. This is the risk that Washington County economic development planners understand and rarely say out loud: single employer dependency. When a community's economic health becomes that closely tied to one company, the employer's condition and the community's condition stop being fully separable. Washington County had Nike. It also had Intel, the semiconductor giant whose large fabrication campus in Hillsboro sits less than 10 miles from Nike's headquarters, and it has been conducting its own rounds of significant layoffs during the same years. They were two of the region's defining employers, contracting simultaneously. In February of 2024, Nike filed a WARN notice with the state of Oregon, as required by federal law, when employers conducting large-scale layoffs must give workers at least 60 days' notice. The notice detailed 740 positions at the Beaverton headquarters to be eliminated in 2 rounds, the first beginning immediately and the second starting by June 28th. 740 people received notification that their jobs were ending. Matt Powell, a consumer industry advisor at BCE Consulting who had covered athletic footwear for years, told Axios at the time that the cuts came from across the organization, hitting management and strategy roles as much as product development. These were not entry-level positions. The people losing their jobs were experienced professionals whose salaries had been supporting the local housing market and contributing to Washington County's tax base for years. The full impact of a reduction like that tends to arrive on its own schedule. Mortgage payments stay current at first. The adjustment is real, but it moves quietly, spread across the decisions of 700 individuals and their households rather than landing all at once. The reason for the cuts was a business that had not performed the way its own strategy assumed it would. Nike's pivot in the early 2020s had been toward direct-to-consumer sales, pulling back from wholesale partners like Foot Locker and Dick's Sporting Goods in favor of its own website and stores. Digital traffic fell instead of rising. Classic sneaker styles had been re-released in volumes the market could not absorb at the prices Nike needed, requiring discounts that compressed margins. Revenue for fiscal year 2024 came in essentially flat. Nike filed an updated WARN notice later in 2024, adding detail to the scope. Over the course of the year, the company also began restructuring around what it called its core sports, concentrating resources on running, basketball, soccer, and training, while reducing investment in categories it had expanded into during the previous decade. In September, additional positions were cut as part of that narrowing. Smaller in number, described by Nike as less than 1% of global headcount, they came on top of a year that had already seen 740 jobs eliminated at the Beaverton headquarters. In October of 2024, Nike replaced its chief executive. John Donahoe, who had led the company since 2020 and was closely associated with the direct-to-consumer strategy, was replaced by Elliott Hill, a 30-year Nike veteran who had briefly retired before being asked to come back. Hill announced a turnaround plan called Win Now and told analysts in his first earnings call that Nike was in the middle innings of its comeback. He used that phrase, or close to it, in several subsequent calls. One of Hill's stated priorities was reducing layers. The language of corporate restructuring tends toward geometry, all layers and structures and architectures, because it keeps the discussion at a comfortable remove from what is actually happening. What layers are, in practice, is people. In May of 2025, Nike restructured its senior leadership team. Heidi O'Neill, the president of Consumer, Product, and Brand, saw her role split into 3 separate functions and left the company. She was named chief executive at Lululemon within a few weeks. The April 2026 round had a more specific logic to it than the earlier ones. Nike announced it was consolidating its global technology footprint into 2 hubs, the Philip H. Knight campus in Beaverton and the Nike India Technology Center. Functions that did not fit into those 2 hubs were being reorganized away. The company was also moving Converse's manufacturing and engineering operations closer to its factory partners, which meant moving those functions out of Beaverton. 1,400 positions were eliminated across North America, Europe, and Asia, with Beaverton absorbing part of that number. Nike's chief operating officer described the changes in a memo to employees as building an even stronger end-to-end foundation for future growth. David Swartz, an analyst at Morningstar, told Reuters the scale of the cut suggested the company's problems ran deeper than had been apparent, and that Nike should be further along in its recovery by now. It was the 4th consecutive year the company had reduced its global workforce. Nike's total employee count had been around 83,700 in 2023. By the end of fiscal year 2025, it was 77,800. The campus that had employed roughly 11,400 people when the first round began was employing fewer at the end of each year after that. By how many fewer, the company did not say. Nike's stock reached approximately $177 per share in November of 2021. In the spring of 2026, it was trading near $50, a decline of more than 70% from that peak. The underlying financial results have been consistent with that number. In fiscal year 2025, Nike's revenue was $46.3 billion, down 10% from the prior year, below $50 billion for the first time since 2022. Net income for the year fell 44%. Gross margins declined by nearly 2 percentage points, driven by the discounting required to move inventory and by a new cost that had not existed in prior periods. Nike manufactures approximately 50% of its footwear in Vietnam and 27% in Indonesia. In 2025, the United States imposed tariffs of 46% on Vietnamese goods and 32% on Indonesian goods. Nike disclosed in its filings that the gross incremental annual cost of those tariffs was approximately $1.5 billion. The options available were to raise prices, absorb the cost in margins, or move production to countries with lower tariffs. Nike moved its manufacturing out of the United States, beginning in the 1970s, shifting through Japan and South Korea before settling in Southeast Asia, specifically because those countries offered lower production costs. The factories are now in the countries where the tariffs are highest. Adidas grew its revenues by double digits in fiscal year 2025. On Running, a Swiss brand that did not exist until 2010, has been growing at more than 30% annually in North America and has taken a significant share of the running consumer Nike spent 40 years developing. Hoka, founded in France in 2009, has done comparable work in trail and road running. Nike helped define the global market for performance athletic footwear. The company's now taking ground in it were startups when the first iPhone shipped. In the fall of 2025, Nike renamed the campus the Philip H. Knight Campus, honoring the co-founder who had sold shoes from a car trunk 6 decades earlier. Elliott Hill wrote to employees that the name was a tribute to the man whose vision had set a global movement in motion. 3 months after the renaming, Nike announced another round of layoffs. In Beaverton, the changes are arriving quietly. Median home values in the city declined by more than 2% over the 12 months through spring of 2026, in a state where values were otherwise moving upward. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data on regional employment, Washington County's single employer dependency makes it uniquely vulnerable to contractions of this scale. Commercial real estate near the campus is absorbing at a reduced rate in some pockets. The 17 buildings are still there, still named for the athletes. The running paths still pass the lake. Nike has not announced it is leaving. What it has said, in each of the last 4 years, is that the number of people working at the campus is smaller than it was the year before. That is what the slow geography of a company town looks like from the inside. Not a departure, but a diminishment. Not abandonment, but the quieter thing that precedes it.